Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast here from the Snowden Deli. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD. Bill Brownstein, who ordinarily would be sitting here, is a bit under the weather, so we wish him well. And we are joined today by Soraya Martinez Ferrada. For those of you who don't know, she is running for mayor of Montreal. So welcome. It's great to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I was looking forward to having Bill on the other side. So
and
maybe we'll introduce him and make him feel part of the show.
Every now and then you can just face that way.
Bill.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Listen, for most people who don't know you, let's start with a little bit of history. So first of all, we found that a couple of weeks ago, you have decided to run for mayor. You had up until then been a federal minister. You're Minister of Tourism in the Trudeau government. You've also, for people who don't know or maybe don't remember, you were a local politician. You were out in Saint Michel from 2005 to 2009, then went into federal politics. So I guess the first question is, federal politicians deciding to come back into municipal politics, why?
Because I'm a Montrealer. This is in my DNA. That's where I started politics. This is where my family, I had my kids in the city, my career was in the city, and I do feel that you have to choose something, and I choose Montreal. That was my first, I was thinking about Montreal, even in federal politics, how everything we do helps or not Montreal, how do we I choose Montreal.
I'm curious. So when you're in federal politics, and your riding is a local riding, but were you following what was happening in Montreal? With the Plante administration, with things that were going on, were you paying attention to that, even as a federal politician?
Yes, I did. I was not only was minister, but I was also parliamentary secretary, which we work with ministers. So I had immigration the first time. Then I had transport, and then I had housing. So in every of those files, I did talk to, or tried to talk to the administration in Montreal at that time. So yes.
So there's a lot to cover, obviously, in terms of what you think things should look like if you become mayor. You just mentioned housing a minute ago, and that you were attached to that. And there's been a big issue with housing in this administration. The lack of housing being built versus what was talked about to be built. And it's funny because we were talking the other day to the federal immigration minister, the housing minister at that time, about the money that the federal government seems to have provided to build housing here that seems to never have gotten done. What's that about? Do you know?
So we have to remember that the money from federal government goes to Quebec first, and then it goes to municipal. So we had to negotiate with Quebec the programs that the federal government had done. So that's a bit of the boring part of it. That's the part of people, saying, well, Quebec says it's federal fault, and then federal says, well, no, it's Quebec fault. So we had a bit of that. And then, of course, once you have that, then Quebec puts on the program that then supports the city. It did take a long time. It did take a long time in terms of how do we support the city with the money. We had the rapid housing funds at the beginning, and unfortunately, those funds took a couple of years to get to the city. And then it takes a couple of years to build them. So it is a lack of, bureaucracy being too long, permits being too difficult to get. And on the other hand, pandemic happened, interest rates going up, construction costs went up. So the project that you had built at the beginning, 3 years later, cost 20% more.
Sure.
So then you have to go back to the Quebec and say, well, this costs more money because the project we had initially thought about cost more. So it took a long time.
So my question would be, how do you change that? You're mayor, and I know housing is important.
Yes.
How do you make that work?
I think, first of all, we do have to give more powers to borrowers in terms of permits. We need to work more closely with borrowers. We are centralized a lot of things in Montreal. We need to a bit decentralize the work to make sure that the borrowers are doing a better job in terms of permits. It doesn't make any sense that if you have a right to construct, it takes 2 years to get a permit. You're in your right to construct. So we have to make that bureaucracy more simple.
Can you do that as mayor, or is that above your pay grade? Is that a provincial issue?
I think we have to kind of mutualize the information and the analyzation of the plans, or when you get a permit, you need to have engineers look at the plans, you need to have architects look at the plans. Maybe there's a way to mutualize the effort in order to
Okay.
make it faster. And I think that's one of the ways that we could do that. The other thing is that making sure that we're taking away the tax on construction we had, the family's 2020 rules that this administration put on.
Which is clearly not working because
It
we
is-
have developers
It
deciding
is
they'll
not
just pay a
working
fine.
at all, because what people are doing is that they pay the fine or they actually don't come. And they
Right.
just go and build in other cities outside Montreal.
So,
we're losing
but then
the
you
point.
have the issue of, in theory, 2020 sounds great. It clearly, in practice, it doesn't
It
seem to be
doesn't.
working.
No.
But you acknowledge there's a need for affordable and social housing.
Absolutely.
So how do you deal with that?
So you have to partner with the private sector. You have to sit down with the private sector. And when you listen to the private sector, what they will tell you is that they don't sit down with the actual administration. So we don't have to see the private sector as the devil. Yes, they're there to make money. That's their whole purpose. That's who they are. That's fine. But how do we be partners with the private sector in order to build more social and affordable housing?
Okay.
So we have to sit down with them and have a conversation. Even buying the land, which is great, fine. But you cannot expect the universe to construct on them. So we have to make sure that if you're buying the land, so that means you're a partner, maybe with the private sector, to do and build more homes. They did this in the Blue Bonnet here. They bought lands, they put a bid on the lands to construct. Nobody bid on them. It was too expensive. If you want to do affordable housing, you have to be able to construct in the very low cost to be able to afford
Sure.
and give the affordability of the rent.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen. I'm glad you brought up a Hippodrome and Blue Bonnets, because
Yes.
this is a running thing I have
know.
with the mayor. We have this beautiful tract of land literally sitting in the middle of the city, accessible by highways east, west, north, south. That land has been sitting now empty. I'm going to take a wild guess for at least 8 years when the province handed it over to the city. Do you have a plan for that? Because as you're describing this, I think back to the argument being made, and I remember the big photo op that the city had. Oh, look, all these people want to build on this site. And of course, as you said, nothing has happened. Although the city has quite the plan for a tram and for electric vehicles and get cars out of the area. But the issue seemed to be infrastructure, that there is no infrastructure
Yes.
there. So is that simply, as you're describing it, a matter of going to the private developers and saying, look, we know it's going to cost X number of dollars just to be able to have this area support affordable housing? That's billions of dollars. How does that happen? Who picks that up?
Well, it is the cost of construction and infrastructure that you can pay over the many years in front of you. So if you have a long-term plan of 15, 20, 25, 30 years in terms of what the cost will be to implement the infrastructure, but at the end of the day, you're going to recover that money. You're going to recover that money on, municipal taxes,
Right.
economic development. So I think the lack of having this very long time vision and sitting down with different levels of government. I mean, I've done that in my life all the time. I'm a fighter, but I don't want to pick fights. You know what I
Okay,
mean?
yeah.
So that means you have to sit down with all level of governments and saying, this is a long-term plan. This is the infrastructure it's going to need, but this is how it's going to be paid out. And the private sector need to be a part of that conversation, because if you want to construct those housing, they'll have to be part of that. I know there's a lot of talks around Blue Bonnet. I know that there's many nonprofit organizations that are in conversation. There's a lot of the private sector also in the conversation. Federal money is being waiting in terms of infrastructure, and I know there's conversations between the federal government and the provincial government in order to invest those monies in infrastructure. But I think it's the key. You cannot build a home if you don't have water and if you don't have electricity. So those go together. And so just thinking about building the home, it's not going to do it. And just thinking about getting the cars out of it, it's not going to build the roads.
Yeah.
So there has to be a more long-term conversation in order to make that happen. Unfortunately, this administration has picked a lot of fights, and it's been, I think, difficult to have a conversation with this administration.
Okay. I can tell you whenever I have open a phone line to talk about things that people are not happy about with the city, there's some pretty regular things that come up. Yes, housing is one of them. The other, got to go there, is bike paths. We had, I think it was Luis Miranda, who the other day in a city council meeting said, or threw out the number that we have spent roughly $800 million to create the bike path network here. And I know some of that is infrastructure, not necessarily tied directly to it, but you know, this time of the year we have snowstorms, and what do people do? They look down there and say, wow, the bike path has been plowed, but the road hasn't. Where do you stand on this whole bike path idea? And I want to point out that these are people who bring this up who don't complain about the fact that we have a bike path here, but at some point you look at it and go, wait a sec, could this money be better spent?
Yeah.
Do we need to be spending as much as we are?
So I think at some point the city of Montreal needed to have bike paths. We didn't have enough at all. When I was a city councilor 20 years ago, we didn't have bike paths. And we need to also address that mobility issue, which is making sure that cyclists have a secure lane to do bicycle. And we needed those investments, I think. The issue is, how do you do them? How do you make sure that where you're doing a bicycle path, people like seniors are taking account? People like local merchants are taking account. It's how you do it that I think people are frustrated about. If you have a bicycle path in front of an exit of ambulances, emergency, it doesn't make any sense. If you're seeing a bicycle path being snow removed before a sidewalk, for the citizen, it doesn't make any sense. So I think this administration has a lot to explain around how did you do these bicycle paths, and how do you make sure that these are secure now, not only for the cyclists, but also for the other people that actually live with them. I've heard a lot of people on Henri Bourassa saying, this is not a good thing. This is not helping my business. This is not helping, seniors getting grocery delivers. They can't anymore because cars can't stop in front of their homes. So I think we have to take into account not only the need of the cyclists, but the whole population that actually lives with those aspects.
So as I hear you describe that, I think to myself, yes, there are plenty of instances like that. We had someone on from a church actually at NDG saying, you know, when there's a funeral going on, we can't even have a hearse stop in front to remove a coffin because it's a bike path and there's nowhere to stop. But I'm wondering, as I hear you say this, can you retroactively go back and make these changes? I'm not even talking about expanding the network. I'm talking about fixing the problems you just outlined. Can that be done?
I think there has to be an audit of the security of those bicycle paths. Yes, absolutely. I think having an audit of the security, people will understand that. And there's things that have to be changed because of that security, not only for the cyclists, but also for, again, to your point, do we need to have a bicycle path in front of an exit of a hospital? We have to think about those things. Maybe that bicycle path was not in the right spot. Maybe it's on the other side of the cross of the street. So we need to have an audit of that, and I don't think that has been done. But again, we needed to have those. We needed to bring the city up to a standard of other international cities where they do have bicycle paths, and we need that too in Montreal. We just need to do it in the right way.
You know, I've often said, and I have nothing against cyclists, I always have to preface whatever I say, but somehow there are people who feel, you know, that this administration kind of has a war against motorists. And I understand that, you know, the city would rather have, or at least Valerie Plante's administration would rather have fewer and fewer cars. But the fact of the matter is we have more and more cars than we've ever had before. So there has to be a way to sort of live together. I don't know the idea, but, you know, all doing this together. But what do you do for motorists who feel they've been ignored here by the city? I mean, first of all, you're paying more for parking than you ever paid before. There are fewer spots to park downtown. Merchants are not happy about that. Do you have a plan for that?
Well, I mean, we'll have a lot of time to bring solutions of our own views for that. But what I would say is that I live east end of Montreal. If you want to go from the east end to downtown, it takes you an hour, 15 hours, 30 minutes if you're lucky. So there's an issue on transportation, for sure. And there is an issue on, yes, taking care of people that don't have a choice to have a car. So I'm not an anti-car. I have a car. And I don't have a choice.
You didn't come here today by bike?
No, unfortunately, that would have taken a long time, and I would have been very late. But I see that there has been very good snow removal
On DeCarry
this.
Boulevard, yeah.
Yes, on the DeCarry Boulevard. But no. But I do think we have to have a plan. Mobility is not only cyclists. Mobility is cars, is collective transport, is how do you make sure that the work that the government of Quebec will need to do in the highways in the city will impact the city. We have to have a conversation with Quebec in terms of, we saw what happened with the Tunnel Hippolyte Lafontaine. Next, it's the Autoroute 40. That's going to be hard for Montreal.
Yeah.
So we need to have a conversation on, yes, bicycle path, but now if these big infrastructure works will come to Montreal, it's going to have a huge impact on cars and people that actually have to, get around the city on cars. So yes, we need to have a better plan on mobility.
Let me go to something else that's been an issue, and that's construction, which despite promises that there be crews and make sure things got better, it has not really changed at all. It's made, as bad as it is getting around, it's made that even worse. How do you deal with that situation? Clearly, we need to have this construction done. It just seems to have been done very badly.
So when I was a city councilor in 2005, there was an issue on under electrical wires of Quebec that wanted to be unburied underground. We waited for that for 40 years. And one of the reasons was that nobody was sitting around the table with Videotron, Gazmo, and all the other that everybody else needed to be around the table. It took me a year and a half to get everybody sitting down around the table. It took me another year to have a plan on how we were going to do it. But we did it. So my point is, I don't understand how we don't have a real coordination with the borrowers, with the merchants, with actually people that are going to be impacted by the work. The other things that we're seeing in many cities across the country is getting into the artificial intelligence to help on coordination. We're the heart of the artificial intelligence in Montreal. I don't understand how we cannot use that.
Use what we create.
Use the information and the knowledge that we have in the city to better coordinate and better inform citizens in terms of the work that's been done in the corner of your street. So we have to find ways, and I have some ideas, and I can't wait to tell you those. But for now, I'll just say that there has to be more done in terms of coordination, information, and getting the work done in the time that they're supposed to do it.
Let me move on to something else. You brought this up earlier on, talking about sort of decentralizing some of the
Yes.
things that the center city now runs. So we're living through the biggest snowstorm we've
Yes.
ever had over the course of 4 days. Some municipalities, some boroughs have said, listen, we would like to clean up, where our citizens live. And the city has basically said, no, you can't, because that's not how things work.
Yeah.
Which, at the end of the day, punishes everybody. Because it doesn't get done. And we're finding out now the city's already said what was a 1-week job is now likely to be a 2-week job. What do you change as far as the centralization is concerned?
We have to rely on the boroughs. What does it mean is that when you live in Ile Bizarre, it's not the same way you're going to snow removal if you live in downtown Montreal. It's not the same reality. We have to rely on the knowledge of their territories for the boroughs. This city has centralized a lot of the snow removals and services to citizens, even taking away the garbage. It's been a bit of the vision been centralized. I think working with the boroughs, they had before this administration came in, they could actually do the emergency removal of the snow. We gave them, they had 2 emergency removals. Now they're up to 1. We had 2 snowstorms. They took the first one, now they can use the second one. And if they do it, they actually get a fine.
Which doesn't make sense.
How can you fine your own borough? It's like it's like a family, right? You're all living in this house, and everybody has a part of the house, and you say, well, you know what, I'm going to take care of this for you. I'm going to do it. No, don't. I don't think it's because you make me look bad, so I'm going to fine you if you do that. It doesn't make any sense. So I think we have to work with the boroughs in a way that tell me what you need to give the service that the citizens deserve, and then we'll make sure that in terms of budget and funding, we're giving the money to the boroughs that they need to do the snow removals. I think we have to be quicker on our feet, and I think relying on the boroughs will give you that. That's
So we let the boroughs make their own decision, at least when it comes to something like this.
Yes, But we have to make sure that the citizen, wherever they live, they have the same service. So in the past, if you remember, and you probably remember this, but if you lived in Saint Michel, you maybe had snow removal at 10 centimeters or 15 centimeters.
Right.
But if you live in Saint Leonard, you had it at 5 centimeters.
Right.
So I want to make sure that citizens have the same service.
Okay.
So it's not doing it better on behalf of another citizen, but just making sure that we have the same service. And that is the work that we need to do with the boroughs and the mayors.
Let me talk about another issue that often comes up, and that's the size of the administration. This
Yes.
administration keeps adding more and more people and costing more and more money. At the end of the day, Montreal's been in a financial situation right now. Can you reduce the size of municipal government?
So one of the things that I said yesterday was that I was actually very surprised that I find out that this administration hired more than 3,000 people, workers in office, that I call them, which, fine, I think we at some point maybe needed more, but I think we have a very unbalanced hiring of blue collars that actually give the service to citizens. We have almost not hired blue collars, very, very small amount. I think we have to re-audit that in terms of what do we need in terms of workforce to deliver the service that we have to give to the citizens, and have the workers that we need in order to do the other stuff that also we have to remember, because Montreal is the biggest city in Quebec. It's an international city. What's the ambition to be that at an international level? Which is another kind of work that the city needs to do. So we have to have that balance. But right now, I think we're not delivering on the services because we haven't hired enough blue collars, and it's something that we need to address.
Do you think we need smaller government here? You know, it's often talked about the
Yes.
fact we have more councillors here than other majors, like New York, like Toronto. And why do we have that? That's not necessary.
Well, I don't think citizens right now want to hear about. It's like in federal government, nobody wants to hear about the Constitution. Just give me the service that I need. Give me the education, the health. Here in Montreal, is that fine? You want to have my list people, fine. But I want a service. I want to have my garbage collected, my snow removed, my sidewalks that I can walk
Right.
in. And you know as well as me, as that we and the government of Quebec, the city of Montreal, is a product of the government of Quebec. And if that conversation is something that the citizens want to have and want to reduce the size of the city in a way that makes the services more easier to do, but that conversation, we had it so many times. If you have less elected officials, do we have more employees in the city, right? It's not a gain in terms of money. I think we have to start talking about efficiency. How we make the city efficient, and what does that take to do that?
Okay. Let me talk about something else that was a bigger issue a few months ago, yet it continues to be an issue now, and that's the city's stance on dealing with anti-Semitism
Yes.
based on the Israel-Gaza conflict. A lot of people not very happy with the way the city handled things, or the police, in fact, for that matter, handled things. We had another incident just this past
Yes.
week, shots being fired at a synagogue. The mayor sort of has paid lip service to this in the past, but the follow-through hasn't been there. Do you agree that more needs to be done?
Absolutely. I mean, any violence against any group and any form of racism, and we see the rise of anti-Semitism in Montreal, it's unacceptable. And we have to remember who we are as Montrealers. This is a city of le vivre ensemble. This is a city where we respect each other. And yes, there's a safe and clean city kind of priority that we have to have. But remember that law enforcement is not the whole solution. It's not because you have more police that people will they'll feel safer. There's a lot of things we can do. I actually met with a lot of people at CIJA and among other things. I said that I was going to go around every borough as per March 1st. I will be talking to the Jewish community and seeing what can we do more to make sure that they feel safe. But having protesters in front of synagogues, that's unacceptable. We can't allow that. And yes, there has to be more to be done for for the community and the Jewish community to feel safe.
If I go back to the McGill encampment,
Yes.
which is in the spring and into the summer, and people kept saying, "What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" The police seemed to be saying they were waiting for the city, for the mayor to tell them to do something. The provincial government came out and actually kind of asked the police the same thing. What are you waiting for? If you had been mayor then, when this was going on, what would you have done?
Talk to the university and say, tell me how to help you to do this. Because don't forget that it is a private land
Yeah.
where the university is responsible. I cannot impose something on the university, but I do feel that the university was looking for support. And I don't know if they got that. So my question would be, first of all, we need to start with the university.
What do you need?
And what do you need?
Right.
And then if you tell me, I need help, I don't have the support in terms of security to deal with this, okay, that's what we need to do. But I cannot come as a sole person and decide one for the university. And again, don't forget that police in Montreal is an independent also
Body,
organization body. And we have to be careful around using the political will on police. We don't want to be in the 60s anymore in terms of
Okay.
what the city is and was at that time. If you remember the city at that time, we didn't allow, for instance, LGBTQ plus in the parks. They would be arrested.
Yeah.
And that was the will of politicians. So we have to be careful, and the line is very fragile, and we have to respect the independence.
So to your point, if you had gone to McGill, and I'll move off this, but I'm just curious, and McGill said, listen, as you said, this is private land. We're worried about safety, security, et cetera. We would like to have them removed. Would you have then asked the police to remove them?
Well, I would have just sit down with the police, but again, it's not. You have to be careful around what's the will of a politician over the body of independence of a police. If the university would have asked the police to intervene, maybe something else. But the police and the politicians have to be careful around who tells the police what to do.
Okay.
I don't think the police would be very happy for me as a politician to tell them what to do. And that's not the role of the mayor. But there is rules and there is law and order in terms of the Code Civil, right? And I think the police has many levers to intervene.
Okay.
But that's a good question around how do we better support our institutions? How do we better encadrer, work on, frame,
yeah.
yes, frame, protesters, and because it is the democratic right to be able to show
To peacefully
and
protest.
to peacefully protest. It is a democratic right. So we have to make sure that we are framing that in a way that citizens feel that they can be on the street and say what they need to
For
say.
the right reason. Okay.
Not for the right reason. Just if they need to say whatever they need to say, they can do that. That's their right. But it is also the right of institutions to feel safe and protected. And that line is very fragile. But yes, I think
Okay.
there's a conversation where a politician or a mayor needs to also sit down with the university and get involved.
Okay.
It's not something where you say, well, this is not me, talk to Quebec, talk to
Okay.
the university. I think we need to be involved. We need to be the person that gets everybody on the table and finds a solution. Yes.
Last question. This week, I guess we found out on Monday, that the city has decided to go ahead with the Bureau de la Langue Française
Yeah.
over and above the Office de la Langue Française, which we already have. I talked about this. I brought this up on my show on CJD, and people are obviously not very happy with this, only because the OQLF, which has been around for a while now, this is their job. They seem to do it
Yeah.
quite well. They have a $40 million budget, over 400 employees. Why do we need a Bureau de la Langue Française to go along with the OQLF?
Well, that's a good question. I think, again, Montreal, as I've said many times, it's a Francophone city. It's Article 2 of our charter. That won't change. There is a very important Anglophone community in Montreal that thrives as, part of the city. It's in DNA, and I think it's one of our biggest strengths also to have a very local and very present Anglophone community. That's why I speak English, right? So I think it's one of our strengths. We have to understand what the mandate is of that bureau. And if the mandate of the bureau doesn't fit or is not in line with what the office of La Langue Française is doing, why do we have it? And that's a great question. Again, this administration has done many bureaus in this administration, and I think it's a question of we need to see if that's really necessary and the cost of that. What does that mean? Okay. But I think the mandate has to be clear and doesn't have to be the same of the Office de Langue Française. If it is, why have it? But I do believe that we need to protect the specificity of what the city is as a francophone city in international level, because it is one of our strengths, but also make sure that the community and the Anglophone community feels that they've been a part of the city, and they've been a part of the city since the beginning.
So the last thing I lied, I had one more question. This city is very big on public consultations, right? Always has been. The office, even though there have been some controversial issues with there. But of course, the thing that galls Montrealers, I think, is the fact that, yes, you hold a public consultation, you get the results, and then you choose to either ignore them or institute a plan that you had from the get-go. Famously, Camille across the mountain, where the city was going to invest a pile of money based on a survey that said they shouldn't do it because people don't want that. You know the city. You know how important a route that has always been for families. What do you do as mayor?
So I remember going up to Camille when I came to the city. I was 8 years old. And for my family, which we didn't have a lot of money, traveling around the city was something not very possible to do. Taking our car and going up the mountain would be something we would do in the weekends. It is not possible anymore. And I think we took out a bit of the heart of what Montreal is about Montreal. And the biggest consultation that Montreal had, which is the one on Camille and what I see about this administration is they don't listen to Montrealers. You don't listen to what they're saying to you. They're saying to you, okay, we need to secure a bicycle path on Camille. Fine, but don't take away my ability to go up the mountain with my mother of 75 years old and my young kids and my stroller, and don't take that away from me. And they're not listening. And I think that's what's been very, very frustrating for Montrealers, that they don't feel listened to.
So that plan about closing it down, you would nix that plan if you became mayor?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have to go back to the drawing board and saying, what do we see for Montreal in terms of the Mount of Montreal? And how do you see families going up there? How do we see cyclists going up to the mountain? How do we see that unfold? But not one over the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you feel about bringing baseball back to Montreal? No, that wasn't a question. That's my issue.
Well, I remember going to the Olympic Stadium, watching the Expos, so I know that is something that we have in the city, that willingness to around the sports, which I'm a bit frustrated that we didn't get FIFA, but that's maybe another show. But I do feel that Montreal is a sporting city, and we just have to make sure that we're being there and being in the international level. And I think there's good ambitions to have.
So I would just, as we wrap up, to Montrealers who are seeing you, meeting you for the first time, you want to run for mayor, what would you like to say to them as a reason to vote for Soraya Martinez Ferrada as mayor?
Well, what I would say is that we have to remember who we are as a city. We have to remember and being proud of our city again. I want to make sure that we are of ambition for ourselves, but we are delivering the service that we need as citizens, and being proud of Montreal.
All right. I thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I will tell hi to Bill for you as well. Okay.
See you next time, Bill.
That wraps up another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.